And welcome along. We've been trying for a while to get this meeting going, and I'm pleased to tell you that the first in our series of Isolation Inspiration is with a great friend and colleague from Network Auctions, Richard, the legend in auctions, Worrall. And he's here today, I'm pleased to say, to tell us all about auctions, how they work. And it's quite different from the open market sale that we're used to. Dickie, tell us about auctions, how they started and what we do now.
Well, auctions have been around a long time, Ken. I know you've heard me talk many times about this, but they go back to around 500 BC, and they are still the purest form of selling. When we drop the gavel, that's a legal and binding agreement. The buyer and seller are contractually bound at that point. There is no renegotiation on price. And when we're selling property, the buyer pays a non-refundable 10% deposit. And the reason why I think auction has continued for all of this time is because it gives both the buyer and the seller certainty of their purchase. They know that once the auctioneer's gavel falls, that they are contractually bound to each other and they will see that transaction through.
Yeah, and I know to a lot of my vendor clients, this will be music to their ears. Wow, there's this way of selling where actually there's no 3-month delay. The thing all goes through, a hammer goes down, the deal is done. Sounds amazing, and actually a lot of people will be asking the question then, why aren't we doing this for all sales?
Because auction isn't suitable for all clients and all properties. So whenever you take a property to auction, what you've got to consider is it's always about the client's best interest. Am I going to get the best result for the client by selling it in a certain way? And as property professionals, you and I both know that whenever we talk to a client, we have to give them the best advice. So is it best to sell your property by a private treaty? Is it best to sell your property by a tender process? Or is it best to sell your property by auction?
Yeah.
And that process, that conversation you have with the client at that point, basically determines what is the best method of sale for that client. So depending on the client's circumstances, good drivers to go to auction are somebody needs a deal done on their property. They have a desire and a need for a result, perhaps where time frame is key to their process. And that's not always for a bad reason. People often say, oh, it's all about death, debt and divorce. And it's not. There are a whole host of reasons why people at any given moment in time need to sell a property within a defined time frame. And auction gives them that. You have you have your marketing period, you have your sale date, and then you have normally 4 weeks. That's the standard time from the date of the auction to completion, but we can also extend that to 6 weeks or 8 weeks depending on personal circumstances, but normally it's 4 weeks from the date of the auction. So it all comes back to, is the property right to go to auction? Are the seller's circumstances right to go to auction? And then if the answers to those questions are looking like they're yes when you're having a chat with the client, then it comes down to, okay, this is how it works. Is that still right for you? And after all of those discussions, that's when the client makes the decision.
Yeah, and we've had a few of these examples quite recently, haven't we, Dickie? A couple of ones I can think of recently. One where I went to see a property in Pollard's Hill, and the client there had a property which had a failed survey, and they were concerned with getting the best price. And we felt at that point, because it was a sort of project, that it was likely to get the best price at auction. And in fact, the client said they'd rather try residential sale first. Well, lo and behold, we went to residential sale, another survey failed. And then at that point, they were like, hands up, let's go to the room. And I think you'll remember the person came with me on the day and was absolutely delighted with the result. And you could have cut the tension with a knife in the room. That's one of the lovely things about auction that obviously we don't see on private treaty, is that atmosphere in the room can be quite electric. And that brings me on to our next one, our more recent auction lot, which we've just sold in the last auction. And this was an interesting one because it was pre-lockdown, and in the middle of the period leading up to the auction, we were all locked down. So that changed the strategy, didn't it, Dickie?
It did. And I think, there's two really good examples there. So the first one, the property in Pollard's Hill, it had, it had 2 bad survey reports. The chances are that it was only going to be sold to a cash buyer. And one of the great things about auction is that if you are only going to be selling to cash buyers, the best way, in my humble opinion, to get the best price for a seller is to put those cash buyers for that property in a competitive environment. Yes, you could probably sell it by private treaty to a cash buyer, but are they going to do it in the time frame the seller wants? On private treaty transactions, the seller is much more, the buyer is much more in control of the time frame of that sale. The seller has very little control. And the nice thing about auction is that once you say to your prospective purchasers, this property is going to auction on this date, the seller is far more in control of their own destiny. They know how long that marketing is going to take, they know the date of the auction, and then they know when they're going to move after that. Yeah. So by putting those cash buyers into that competitive environment on the property in Pollard's Hill, fantastic result for her. Yeah. And when you're in the room, you have an idea, an expectation, a hope of where it's going to go, but you never quite know where it's going to go until the bidding starts. The second one
pumps, doesn't it, Dickie? It really does pump that adrenaline.
It does, and you know, myself and all the other auctioneers at Network Auctions, we have a huge amount of respect for every single client who takes that property to auction, and it doesn't matter if it's a £1 million plus property or whether it's a £5,000 piece of land. They are putting their trust and faith in us that the marketing that we've done is going to generate enough interest to get that property sold on the day.
I think that's absolutely right. And one of the things I love about working with you, Dickie, is I think that your interests are our interests. So for all those out there that might consider auctions, one of the lovely things about working with us and Network Auctions is that they get the traditional sale methods, in that we'll still come around and we'll still have the local buyers looking. We'll still do the full particulars. We'll still do the viewings for you. We're still the local guy on the corner. But by the same token, we've got the national network auction coverage. And something else I think is worth mentioning, Dickie, that a lot of people don't know about is the Essential Information Group, and how that disseminates information to a massive range of cash buyers in a way that only Rightmove could compete with, really, but to a specialist group of buyers. I think that's critical to the exposure of the property in an auction environment, and obviously you provide that.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, the Essential Information Group is kind of the Rightmove for auctioneers. A significant amount of people, investors, cash buyers, subscribe to the Essential Information Group in order to get properties, or details of properties rather, that are just going to auction. A lot of people who buy at auction, they do not spend time going through Zoopla, Rightmove, On the Market, any of the property portals. The property portals are fairly and squarely aimed at people who are looking to buy their first home or their second home or their third home or downsizing. They are advertising properties that people are going to live in themselves, have a desire, need, wish, whatever you want to call it, to live in those properties. Properties that go to auction have to be advertised in that way, but also in a different way as well. So you bring in those investor clients who would not subscribe or bother going on to any of the main property portals in order to find the sort of things that they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that kind of sort of neatly dovetails into the second one, the second property that you spoke about a short while ago, the property in Tooting. And there was a really good reason for that to go. Well, there was a couple of really good reasons for that to go to auction. Firstly, the seller's time frame. Also because it wasn't quite as straightforward. Although the property was split into flats, had been for a significant number of years, there was no planning there for that. So a lot of lenders and a lot of solicitors acting for clients would have a whole host of questions on that. And the thing about people who buy at auctions is that they tend to be far more forgiving. They understand quite often the reason why a property is going to auction. They do their due diligence on it and they make a commercial decision based on that. And for the property in Tooting, certainly we're going through a huge amount of change at the moment with all the social restrictions going on. So the fact that you launched it before all the social restrictions came into place, but then the auction itself took place when those restrictions have been in place for some time. We learned a lot from that. because the auction that we held was fully online. And that's the first time that we'd ever held a fully online auction. Normally the auctions are at the Westbury Hotel in Mayfair. You get that super buzz in the room. And there is nothing that an auctioneer likes more than standing up in front of a room full of people and having that sense of, expectation, hope, and an achievement at the end of it.
I love that. That atmosphere in the room, Dickie, is just something that if you've never been, you should go just for that, in my view. But this was interesting, wasn't it? Because we started out thinking we're going to go to the room. And when I spoke to my client, he said, well, how does it all work? I said, well, come with me, we'll go together. And he said, I can't do it. Ken, it would kill me. I can't go to the room. I said, that's fine. I'll be in the room for you. Don't worry. And anyway, I've got my network auction partners there. I know they're going to do their best for you because that's what they do every day. I've got every confidence in that. But by the same token, it's nice to be there just to feel the atmosphere. And as you know, whenever I've got a lot in, I'm in the room every time in London with you. And the thing is, for me, that's a really special environment. I love to see that go. But what was really interesting this time was that, as you rightly say, we were in a position where it was like, well, what do we do? And I spoke to the client and I said, well, look, we've got a couple of choices here. We could wait for the next live auction, but A, when would that be? B, would that produce a better traction than we've already got? Because by this stage, we had considerable interest in the lot and it looked like it was going to go really well anyway. And C, could we get everyone that would potentially enter the room into the virtual auction? And I think you did a terrific job of that.
Well, I think, as we said before, it's always about giving the client best advice. And that's not just at the start of the process, it's all the way through the process. Yes, you're absolutely right. You had gained significant traction on the property. And it would have been a real shame, having gained that traction, that the process didn't go through to its completion. So it's always really hard to relaunch a property a second time around. And as you said, who knows when our next physical auctions will be? The hotels are closed, and we've no idea when they're going to be open. So all auctioneers are running their auctions either fully online or they're streaming them with an auctioneer, just basically the camera on the auctioneer, and then telephone bids or internet bids coming in front of him with staff at safe social distancing according to the government guidelines. We chose the fully online auction with no streaming of the auctioneer for a number of reasons. But whichever one of those you do as an auctioneer, you don't have people turning up in the room who have, what am I trying to say? They haven't had to part with their deposit up front. So the key thing about an auction is that for the seller, if we have any remote bids, normally in our ballroom auctions in London, all of those people have had their AML checks done, they've completed their bidding forms, and we're holding a deposit from them. Now, you can turn up in the room and not place the deposit on the property until you are the successful purchaser. So this was different in this instance. The property in Tooting, it was guided at 795. So we were asking people to part with 10% of the guide price and place it in our client's account before they bid on that property.
And what was fantastic, Dickie, just to cut in there, sorry, was that the price that we finally achieved was £250,000 ahead of that guide, over £250,000 ahead of that guide, which I thought was a fantastic result. And the client was absolutely delighted, by the way. He was really pleased. And I did actually invite him to join me to watch the virtual auction online. And he declined again. He said, I don't think my heart could take it. So I said, well, don't worry, I'll be watching it for you. And I actually, when I saw it starting, it was a really tense moment for me because it always seemed that I always want the best for my clients, as you know. And watching it there, it seemed to hover around the guide price for an inordinate length of time to me. And I was just sat there thinking, I've let the client down. This isn't working. And then all of a sudden, bang, it was off. And then, of course, one of the great things about the online system that you use is that delay. Every time someone makes a bid, then the auction is delayed by a further, is it 30 seconds before?
Further 60 seconds, yeah. 60
seconds. So every time someone makes a bid during the final throes of the time limit, it's then extended every time someone makes a bid. And that's a very tense time, isn't it?
It is, and this is one of the main differences between the room auction and the online auction. So in the room auction, the auctioneer has control of the room. And you can say, you know, we're going to start the bidding at this level, and if nobody comes in, you can drop it down, and then you take your first bid, and then off you go. With the online program, people have been using eBay for a huge amount of time, and they are used to putting their bids in at the last possible minute. So it doesn't matter whether you have a bidding window of 3 hours or 3 minutes. People will leave their bids till the last possible moment. And that's exactly what you experience, thinking, oh my goodness me, it's just sitting there at pretty much the guide price. Have we done the right thing? And then the bids start coming in. What you said is absolutely right. If a bid comes in the final 60 seconds of our time for a particular lot, then the bidding window extends for a further 60 seconds and continues to do so until there are no more competing bids in the final 60 seconds. So although the property had its time slot of 12:50, then I don't think the bidding actually finished until about 1:10. Because of the extra bids that kept on coming in and coming in. So there's no way on this system that somebody can, I think it's called sniping. I'm a bit old and not hugely technical, but people have told me if you bid on something on eBay, you can get a bit of kit that enables you to get your bid in at the last possible fraction of a second, but it doesn't matter on this system.
Yeah, because it would just extend for another 60 seconds. So
extend for another 60 seconds. And our job at the end of the day is always to get the best result for the client. Absolutely. And that's why the system is designed that way. But it is, and for us as auctioneers, that was a very different feel for us compared to being in the room on the day. Exactly the same as you felt when you were sitting there thinking, oh my goodness me, is this going to take off? Is this going to take off? And having seen online auctions before, I know everybody leaves it to the last possible minute.
Yeah, but it was a fabulous result, and it was great to see it work in that context. Because of course then, my client, not being familiar with auctions, has phoned me and said, you know, this lockdown looks like it's going to be longer, should I worry? And I said, well, actually, the client has now parted with 10% of the purchase price. You shouldn't worry in the slightest. You know, this sale is more locked down than any others. If he walks away, that 10% is lost and it's going to be paid over to you. So that's never going to happen. And he was really reassured by that. And I think that's a key factor, isn't it? The fact that you can, when that gavel, even if it be a virtual one, is dropped, the deal is done. Now, some people won't understand how we managed to get there, where in a residential sale, there's a 3-month lag sometimes with lease inquiries, freehold inquiries, searches, surveys, all the rest of it. And the way we do that is we have a pre-auction pack which answers all the questions that would normally be answered in the space between a sale being agreed and the exchange of contracts. And that's why we're able to do this at auction.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. The auction legal pack is all the legal paperwork that would normally be passed across on a private treaty transaction once you have agreed a price with the seller. And of course, the thing with all private treaty transactions is that they only go through at the speed of the slowest person in that transaction process, whether it be the buyer or the buyer's or the buyer's financial provider or the buyer's buyers, solicitor, etc., etc. So you're never going to move quicker than the slowest person. So at auction, we have this defined marketing period, ideally 3.5 to 4 weeks for the property. You don't need it any longer than that because you need to keep your buyers focused in, because there's lots of opportunities for them out there. You want to keep them focused in that, yeah, this one's the right one to buy and it's coming up for sale quite quickly. But in order to make that work, you need to give your buyers, or prospective purchasers rather, as much information about that property as you possibly can. So the legal pack from the solicitors is key to making it work. Interestingly, going back to what you just said about how your client feels about, you know, their buyer being locked in at the moment. The other thing about auction is that once a buyer has exchanged contracts, if for any reason they are struggling to get their finance in place, they are hugely focused on getting their finance in place because they know of the penalties that they will potentially incur. And we've just had a really, this is quite an interesting story, so bear with me, it's not that long, but it is quite interesting. We sold a property back in the February auction, and obviously the current circumstances that we're in now were not apparent or applicable at that time. So they purchased this property, quite a substantial sum of money, just under £1 million. And as they were coming up towards completion, their lender, who they'd used for many, many years, said, there's no lending. We're out the market. There is no lending. We cannot give you the finance to complete this purchase. So they have found themselves in a bit of a pickle. So what they've done is they've had to go off and get alternative funding. And this is where the markets that we all work in find a way to make it work. And if you're dealing with companies that have a can-do attitude, as long as they are obviously adhering to all government guidelines, then there are funders out there. There are surveyors who will come out and do a valuation on a property, as long as it's vacant or the property can be vacated. And they have now gone and sourced alternative finance within a few days of having to do so in order to make their completion happen. Now, that wouldn't happen in a private treaty transaction.
No, I think I remember you saying to me once, Dickie, that when we were talking about one, and I said to you, you know, we need to be sure this one goes through. I think your response was, well, Ken, if it doesn't, the buyer will be in a world of pain.
Yeah.
It's an apt description.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awful lot of money for somebody to lose a 10% deposit, and then, you know, they're potentially in for a huge amount of costs. Technically, although it doesn't happen very often, if a buyer buys it complete, and let's just say we sold it for £1 million first time round, and then it resold at auction second time for 800,000, in, you know, technically the first buyer is on the hook for the missing amount of money. Well, you kind of got to make a bit of a commercial decision at that point as to whether you think it's worthwhile going after them for that amount of money. But yeah, technically, they are in for you know, a lot of pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the big attraction, isn't it? Because a lot of sellers in today's market, especially those that struggle with chains maybe falling through or surveys, you know, they want that certainty that an auction can bring. And that is a beautiful thing when you're used to the circumstances maybe being dictated by the chain or the buyer or the survey, to all of a sudden find that you're in the driving seat after that gavel drops. It really is a thing of beauty. And although there is a financial penalty for that, it's one that some sellers will actually take. And that's where you come in, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think, you know, now in our profession, in your profession, we're all operating in a hugely different marketplace at the moment. Because of the social restrictions in place, you know, you can't do viewings on property at the moment. We're not deemed to be an essential service. I know there's a lot of moves from Property Mark, who are our governing, that's the umbrella organisation that covers NAVA, the National Association of Valuers and Auctioneers, the NAA, which is the National Association of Estate Agents, and ALA, the lettings division. So Property Mark are constantly in touch with government and giving their members weekly and almost daily updates on how those discussions with government are going. But we're not at the moment classed as an essential service. However, properties are still selling and exchanging contracts at the moment. I was talking to somebody I've known for best part of 20 years the other day. He's got a hugely successful business in Buckinghamshire. They've done 24 simultaneous completions, exchanging completions, since the social restrictions have been in place.
Incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. And it's because people have to move, need to move, and they're dealing with people who've got a can-do attitude, whether that's the buyer and the seller, whether that's the solicitors involved, all of those things. Now, it's not to say that it's a rosy picture out there. That would be completely incorrect of me to say that. However, what we learned from the last auction was that if you are selling things where people do not have to view it, so land with or without planning permission, garage blocks, sort of slightly alternative investment opportunities, the buyers that are out there, they buy 365 days a year. Well, if they can't go and view the properties that they would normally view to buy, they are still wanting to buy because they're still investing their money. They still want to make money. Other things that you know, sold well in the last auction, flats with short leases. they tend to be very good sellers anyway. But generally, you know, investors will not go and view a flat with a short lease. They'll just make a commercial decision on whether they think it's the right sort of money.
Well, that's interesting, Dickie, because when you think that through, if you think about the stock market, many people that have invested in stock market would have seen a huge drop in their investment values and perhaps their dividends as well. And anyone that's renting may well see a bit of a drop off in rents not coming through, but the vast majority of tenants will continue to pay. And therefore, the income's coming, but also more importantly, the capital value of the investment, the underlying value of that property is still remaining at the moment constant. Now that may change slightly, but certainly we don't expect or anticipate to see the massive drop-offs. And I wonder whether some of that stock market investment money is actually being flipped over into residential, because something with a short lease that can be picked up cheap with maybe 20, 30 years left on the lease, well, that's 20, 30 years of rental income one could achieve, which would give you a yield way above what you could get elsewhere, virtually guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's always got an opinion on where the market might or might not go. So I can only deal with how the market was before this crisis came about. There was a huge amount of demand that had been building and building throughout 2019. And once the election was out of the way, once Brexit was sorted, the December auction was our best ever December auction, one of the best auctions we've had for a long time. Lots of confidence, lots of buyers, and that continued through into February. Again, February was a hugely successful sale. So there was this pent-up demand. And is that going to continue once we are out of what we're in at the moment? I don't know any more than anybody else. But I would agree with you that a lot of money that perhaps was being invested elsewhere is going in different directions at the moment.
Yeah, and I would agree. I would say that you're right there, Dickie. I don't think for 1 minute, I'm not suggesting the market's going to be flying upwards. I don't expect that to happen for one moment. But what I do think is, whilst interest rates are so low, it's highly unlikely that there'll be a deluge of property on the market. Of course, there will be probates, sadly, with the circumstances as they are, and the occasional forced sale. But the vast majority of the open market, in my view, will choose to just sit tight and wait. And that will be a frustration because we'll see much lower volumes. But of course, when things are released into the market, the limited supply, in my view, will actually hold back any massive falls that are suggested by some. I appreciate that income will be affected, unemployment may well go up as a result of this, probably will. So I don't suspect for one moment it will be easy. But I also think before December and before the whole Brexit and election thing, we were in a situation where the market was in a lull anyway, because nobody was confident of what was happening with Brexit or indeed the government. So I wonder if we're just back to where we were then, and it's kind of, going to stay in that sort of lull where we have a low level of transaction, but prices aren't as impacted as people suspect. I think that's what may happen. But that's, as you say, it's a crystal ball gaze, really.
It is, and the truth of it is that nobody really knows. There's already been a number of reports have come out within the industry to say, this might happen and that might happen. Well, guess what? If you bring out enough reports and you have enough opinions, then somebody's going to be right somewhere along the line. But we don't know any more than anybody else. What we do know is that the auction market always finds the right level. So, apart from ourselves, there are a number of other auction houses that are now running their auctions either streamed or online. And I've always said that the auction is, and the auction market, we're kind of like a speedboat, with all due respect. Estate agents are more like a super tanker. Their turning circle is huge. We have to be like a speedboat. Because
can I be a Sunseeker yacht there, please, Dickie?
I think but for me, the thing is that if we have a sale and the results aren't as good as we expect, then that's probably because the pricing to the buying public is not at the right level. So you've got to adjust and assess that very, very quickly. And when you've got another auction coming up 6 or 8 weeks later, then you need to be telling your clients, look, this is what happened at the last auction. So you need to be here, not there on your pricing if you want to get things moving forward. And with an estate agency practice, you're less likely to make that change within that time frame. Now, we can't, as a business, afford to, have 2-3 bad sales just because we're giving our client the wrong advice. It doesn't work that way.
No, absolutely. And I agree with you. I mean, a stop clock is right twice a day, right? So, predictions will always, one of them will be right in the end. And I don't think, let's face it, none of us have been in this situation before in our
No.
lifetimes. And even in recent history, they say learn from history. Well, what history? The Spanish flu? What was the property market then? Come on, realistically. So nobody really knows. But it's a very interesting time. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens when the lockdown starts to be eased and how quickly the situation recovers. But I think that's been really interesting and really revealing, Vicky. Thanks so much for coming on. This is our first in a series of these interviews, and you've been great. It's been great to hear about the auction market and how it differs from the residential sale market. I hope the general public can see the differences between the two. And any questions or queries, please do comment, share, and like the video, and we'll be happy to respond and let you know where we're at in terms of the next auction, things like that. If you're interested in an auction discussion, myself and Vicky are always keen to talk about that.
Well, the next auction's coming up on May the 21st. We've already got a good number of entries in for that already. And as always, Ken, we will always give the client best advice. Just because somebody thinks they want to sell quickly, selling at auction may well not be right for them. And that's where, your experience and my experience, we can have those conversations with them and see if now is the right time. But if it is the right time and it is the correct circumstances for the seller, there are certainly buyers out there who will make it happen for them.
Yeah, and that's what I love about working with you, Dickie, is that it's not about the money, it's actually about giving the correct advice in the end. And that's why we're proud to call you a business partner here at James Alexander and Network Auctions.
Well, lovely to work with you, Ken, and thanks for the video.
Yeah, thanks for your time.